In yet more evidence that the Trump administration is an unserious place to be, and despite it involving the Department of War, which is a bullshit title, right? It's still the Department of Defense. The latest credentialed member of the, quote, press, I feel like this entire episode has to just be in quotes because she ain't even close to being a member of the press. Laura Loomer has now apparently been credentialed to cover the Department of Defense. I want you to let that sink in for a hot second, like a hot, stinking pile of trash a second. Laura Loomer, conspiracy theorist, Islamophobe, genuinely all-around horrible fucking person, has now been credentialed at the Department of Defense. Shockingly, she's only age 32, although she don't look like it. She routinely meets with convicted felon Donald Trump in the Oval Office, and yet has been unable to secure official positions on at least 4 occasions, according to media reports, in any of Trump's administrations. Notably, she also actually doesn't have any roles, per se, in any of his businesses or any of his organizations. She's just a really annoying, problematic gadfly. If you'll recall, last month, en masse, credible reporters from credible places, outlets like the New York Times, etc., they walked out. They said, you know, we're not going to sign this pledge of fealty to the Department of Defense in order to have access to cover the Department of Defense. And I'm just going to refresh your recollection right now because it's worthwhile to share with you. These new rules in order to obtain press credentials that were set forth by Pete Hegseth and others effectively said that we at the Department of Defense are going to gatekeep the release of any information. And if you don't like it and you don't sign this pledge of fealty, you can get the hell out. And that's why the New York Times, CNN, even Fox News refused to sign that pledge, and they walked out. The National Press Club at the time issued this statement, quote, independent coverage of the U.S. military is essential to public trust and oversight. A Pentagon that limits scrutiny, limits understanding, and weakens the very institution it seeks to protect. The First Amendment does not stop at the Pentagon's gates, which is true, right? And when we sit here looking at all these extrajudicial murders and killings that are happening at the hands of the Department of Defense in the Caribbean Sea and in the Eastern Pacific, there is an urgency for there to be independent reporting by the media as to what is happening. The memo that several credible agencies refused to sign asked correspondents not to gather information that had not yet been approved for release. And if they did ask sources for information, those reporters and correspondents could risk losing access to the Pentagon. I mean, it flies in the face of how things are normally done. And yet it also suggests that the Department of Defense, led by DUI hire Pete Hegseth, is desperate to keep things hidden from any measure of public scrutiny. It's kind of scary if you think about what is happening behind the gates of the Pentagon that isn't going to get accurate, independent coverage now that you don't have those real news outlets present. As this article from Axios explains, most news organizations view soliciting tips as part of standard news gathering. It's also typical in reporting, especially on national security issues, to ask for and receive information from officials, and that information has not yet been explicitly cleared for release by their superiors. It's called reporting. It's been around for a long-ass time, and yet Hegseth wants to gatekeep it so that it's not done in a fair and independent way. So you may ask yourself right now, who are the, quote, media outlets that do have access to the Pentagon? Who are the people or the outlets that were willing to sign this pledge of loyalty And it includes the Gateway Pundit, the National Pulse, Human Events, podcaster Tim Pool, Just the News, Frontlines by Turning Point USA, One America News, OAN, and Lindell TV. Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, the election denier, that's his streaming service, just in case you were wondering. What is the common denominator for all of those, quote, media outlets? Their undying support for convicted felon Donald Trump and his policies. Other outlets include LifeSite News, a Catholic advocacy publication that deals with abortion. Their Pentagon reporter is a former aide to Congressman Paul Gosar. You know, the congressman who's been accused of making anti-Semitic and misogynistic comments. It also includes Red State, owned by Christian radio giant Salem Media, whose reporter was the comms director for James O'Keefe, the right-wing guy who founded Project Veritas, and Gateway Pundit, who I've mentioned already. A site that often spreads conspiracy theories, Gateway Pundit will have 2 military correspondents at the Pentagon, one who's best known for pushing pardons for participants in the insurrection on January 6, 2021. That's the quality of the people that are going to be reporting on the Pentagon. The director of Yale Law School's Media Freedom and Information Access Clinic, David Schultz, says the following, quote, "These new regulations are really not about national security. They're about controlling viewpoint and content." Whatever happened to the First Amendment? It's under siege. Tim Pool is somebody that I've mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the podcaster, the guy who wears the beanie. Tim Pool, I shall remind you, was paid to produce videos for a company that was secretly funded by the Russian government. Pool has not been charged, but claimed he's, quote, unaware of where those payments came from, $100,000 per video. Tim Pool wants you to believe that he has no idea where $100,000 per video came from. But again, he's going to be covering the Pentagon, the Defense Department, after being paid by the Russians to produce videos. It hurts, the measure of stupidity that is happening right now to the United States. But getting back to Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer ran unsuccessfully twice for the U.S. House of Representatives in the state of Florida in both 2020 and 2022. I remind you, she also chained herself to the doors of Twitter after she had problems with Twitter. She's also a little nutty, in my humble opinion. And the fact that she now has credentials, but like the New York Times doesn't have credentials, I think should really give all of us cause for pause. In addition, those new guidelines from the Department of Defense requires that the press corps has to live near the nation's capital, saying credentialed correspondents should be at the Pentagon at least 3 times a month. But people are not going to do that. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to have effective coverage of what is happening if we're issuing credentials for the press to people like Laura Loomer. I don't think I have to tell you that it flies in the face of the ideas of an independent fourth estate if that media estate is beholden to the president. I think it's another example of executive branch overreach that we're seeing occur now. Why? Because if you, as felon Trump, control the dissemination of information, then you effectively have created an arm of propaganda at one of the most powerful and most dangerous agencies and arms of our federal government, the Department of Defense. As I mentioned, when you have extrajudicial killings happening involving foreign nationals under the guise of a lie that is yet to be proven that any of the 60-plus people that have been murdered were, quote, narco-terrorists, and the people that are supposed to hold you to account are members of the media, among others, and those members of the media are only holding press credentials because they have signed a pledge of fealty to you and the government, you cannot expect people to believe anything that is, quote, reported from any of those outlets. It's incredibly sad that we find ourselves in a place now where the news is not the news. It's the people that are supposed to be reporting the news that are the news. Because people like Laura Loomer only serve to do a disservice to the American people through her antics, through her social media, and through the lack of credible reporting that we're going to be getting from somebody like her concerning the Department of Defense. Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.